You want even more free audiobooks? Click the link in the video description and get your 3 audiobooks free.
Preface to The Art of War by Niccolò Machiavelli. Translated by Henry Neville. Recording by Clive Catterall. Preface by Niccolò Machiavelli, Citizen and Secretary of Florence, on the books on the Art of War, to Lorenzo di Filippo Strozzi, a gentleman of Florence. Many, Lorenzo, have held and still hold the opinion that there is nothing which has less in common with another, and that is so dissimilar, as civilian life is from the military. Whence it is often observed, if any one designs to avail himself of an enlistment in the army, that he soon changes, not only his clothes, but also his customs, his habits, his voice, and in the presence of any civilian custom he goes to pieces. For I do not believe that any man can dress in civilian clothes who wants to be quick and ready for any violence, nor can that man have civilian customs and habits who judges those customs to be effeminate, and those habits not conducive to his actions. Nor does it seem right to him to maintain his ordinary appearance and voice, who, with his beard and cursing, wants to make other men afraid. Which makes such an opinion, in these times, to be very true. But if they should consider the ancient institutions, they would not find matter more united, more in conformity, and which of necessity should be like to each other as much as these, civilian and military. For in all the arts that are established in a society for the sake of the common good of men, all those institutions created to make people live in fear of the laws and of God would be in vain if their defence had not been provided for, and which, if well arranged, will maintain not only these, but also those that are not well established. And so, on the contrary, good institutions without the help of the military are not much differently disordered than the habitation of a superb and regal palace, which, even though adorned with jewels and gold, if it is not roofed over, will not have anything to protect it from the rain. And if, in any other institutions of a city or of a republic, every diligence is employed in keeping men loyal, peaceful, and full of fear of God, it is doubled in the military. For in what man ought the country to look for greater loyalty than in that man who has promised to die for her? In whom ought there to be a greater love of peace than in him who can only be injured by war? In whom ought there to be a greater fear of God than in him who, undergoing infinite dangers every day, has more need of his aid? If these necessities in forming the life of the soldier are well considered, they are found to be praised by those who gave the laws to the commanders, and by those who were put in charge of the military training, and followed and imitated with all diligence by others. But because military institutions have become completely corrupt, and far removed from the ancient ways, these sinister opinions have arisen, which make the military hated, and intercourse with those who train them avoided. And I, judging by what I have seen and read, that it is not impossible to restore it to ancient ways, and return some form of past virtue to it, have decided not to let this leisure time of mine pass without doing something, to write what I know of the art of war, to the satisfaction of those who are lovers of the ancient deeds. And although it requires courage to treat of those matters of which others have made a profession, none the less I do not believe that it is a mistake to occupy a position with words, which may with greater presumption have been occupied with deeds. For the errors which I should make in writing can be corrected without injury to any one, but those which are made with deeds cannot be found out except by the ruin of the commanders. You, Lorenzo, will therefore consider the quality of these efforts of mine, and will give in your judgment of them that censure or praise which will appear to you to be merited. I send you these as much to show myself grateful for all the benefits I have received from you, although I will not include in them the review of this work of mine, as well as also because, being accustomed to honour similar works of those who shine because of their nobility, wealth, genius, and liberality, I know you do not have many equals in wealth and nobility, few in ingenuity, and no one in liberality. End of Preface. Book 1, Part 1 of The Art of War by Niccolò Machiavelli. Translated by Henry Neville. Recording by Clive Catterall. Book 1, Part 1. As I believe it is possible for one to praise without concern any man after he is dead, since every reason and supervision for adulation is lacking, I am not apprehensive in praising our own Cosimo Rucellai, whose name is never remembered by me without tears, as I have recognised in him those parts which can be desired in a good friend among friends, and in a citizen of his country. For I do not know what pertained to him more than to spend himself willingly, not excepting that courage of his, for his friends. And I do not know of any enterprise that dismayed him when he knew it was for the good of his country. And I confess freely not to have met among so many men whom I have known and worked with, a man in whom there was a mind more fired with great and magnificent things. Nor does one grieve with the friends of another of his death, except for his having been born to die young, unhonoured within his own home, without having been able to benefit any one with that mind of his. For one would know that no one could speak of him, except to say that a good friend had died. It does not remain for us, however, or for anyone else who, like us, knew him, to be able, because of this, to keep the faith, since deeds do not seem to his laudable qualities. It is true, however, that fortune was not so unfriendly to him that it did not leave some brief memory of the dexterity of his genius, as was demonstrated by some of his writings and compositions of amorous verses, in which, as he was not in love, he employed as an exercise in order not to use his time uselessly in his juvenile years, in order that fortune might lead him to higher thoughts. Here it can be clearly comprehended that if his objective was exercise, how very happily he described his ideas, and how much he was honoured in his poetry. Fortune, however, having deprived us of the use of so great a friend, it appears to me it is not possible to find any other better remedy than for us to seek to benefit from his memory, and recover from it any matter that was either keenly observed or wisely discussed. And as there is nothing of his more recent than the discussions which the Lord Fabrizio Colonna had with him in his gardens, where matters pertaining to war were discussed at length by that lord, with questions keenly and prudently asked by Cosimo, it seemed proper to me, having been present with other friends of ours, to recall him to memory, so that, reading it, the friends of Cosimo who met there will renew in their minds the memory of his virtue, and another part, grieving for not having been there, will learn in part of many things discussed wisely by a most sagacious man, useful not only to the military way of life, but to the civilian as well. I will relate, therefore, how Fabrizio Colonna, when he returned from Lombardy, where he had fought a long time gloriously for the Catholic king, decided to pass through Florence, to rest several days in that city, in order to visit His Excellency the Duke, and see again several gentlemen with whom he had been familiar in the past. Whence it appeared proper to Cosimo to invite him to a banquet in his gardens, not so much to show his generosity, as to have reason to talk to him at length, and to learn and understand several things from him according as one can hope to from such a man, for it appeared to him to give him an opportunity to spend a day discussing such matters as would satisfy his mind. Fabrizio, therefore, came as planned, and was received by Cosimo together with several other loyal friends of his, among whom were Zanobi Buondelmonti, Battista della Palla, and Luigi Alemanni, young men most ardent in the same studies, and loved by him, whose good qualities, because they were also daily praised by himself, we will admit. Fabrizio, therefore, was honoured according to the times and the place, with all the highest honours they could give him. And as soon as the convivial pleasures were past, and the table cleared, and every arrangement of feasting finished, which, in the presence of great men and those who have their minds turned to honourable thoughts, is soon accomplished, and because the day was long and the heat intense, Cosimo, in order to satisfy their desire better, judged it would be well to take the opportunity to escape the heat by leading them to the more secret and shadowy parts of his garden. When they arrived there, and chairs brought out, some sat on the grass, which was most fresh in the place, some sat on chairs placed in those parts under the shadow of very high trees. Fabrizio praised the place as most delightful, and looking especially at the trees, he did not recognize one of them, and looked puzzled. Cosimo, becoming aware of this, said, "Perhaps you have no knowledge of some of these trees, but do not wonder about them, because here are some which were more widely known by the ancients than those commonly seen to-day." And giving him the name of some, and telling him that Bernardo, his grandfather, had worked hard in their culture, Fabrizio replied, "I was thinking that it was what you said I was, and this place and this study made me remember several princes of the kingdom, who delighted in their ancient culture and the shadow they cast." And stopping speaking of this, and somewhat upon himself as though in suspense, he added, "If I did not think I would offend you, I would give you my opinion. But I do not believe in talking and discussing things with friends in this manner that I insult them. How much better would they have done, it is said with peace to every one, to seek to imitate the ancients in the strong and rugged things, not in the soft and delicate, and in the things they did under the sun, not in the shadows, to adopt the honest and perfect ways of antiquity, not the false and corrupt. For while these practices were pleasing to my Romans, my country, without them, was ruined." To which Cosimo replied, "But to avoid the necessity of having to repeat so many times who is speaking, and what the other adds, only the names of those speaking will be noted, without repeating the others." And Cosimo therefore said, "You have opened the way for a discussion which I desired, and I pray you to speak without regard, for I will question you without regard. And if, in questioning or in replying, I accuse or excuse any one, it will not be for accusing or excusing, but to understand the truth from you." Fabrizio said, "And I will be much content to tell you what I know of all that you ask me. Whether it be true or not, I will leave to your judgment. And I will be grateful if you ask me, for I am about to learn as much from what you ask me as you will from me replying to you. Because many times a wise questioner causes one to consider many things and understand many others, which, without having been asked, would never have been understood." Cosimo said, "I want to return to what you first were saying, that my grandfather and those of yours had more wisely imitated the ancients in rugged things than in delicate ones. And I want to excuse my side, because I will let you excuse the other, your side. I do not believe that in your time there was a man who disliked living as softly as he, and that he was so much a lover of that rugged life which you praise. None the less, he recognized he could not practice it in his personal life, nor in that of his sons, having been born in so corrupt an age, where any one who wanted to depart from the common usage would be deformed and despised by every one. For if any one in a naked state should thrash upon the sand under the highest sun, or upon the snow in the most icy months of winter, as did Diogenes, he would be considered mad. If any one, like the Spartan, should raise his children on a farm, make them sleep in the open, go with head and feet bare, bathe in cold water in order to harden them to endure vicissitudes, so that they might love life less and fear death less, he would be praised by few and followed by none. So that, dismayed at these ways of living, he presently leaves the ways of the ancients, and in imitating antiquity does only that which he can with little wonderment." Fabrizio said, "You have excused him strongly in this part, and certainly you speak the truth, but I did not speak so much of those rugged ways of living as of those other more human ways which have a greater conformity to the ways of living to-day, which I do not believe should have been difficult to introduce by one who is numbered among the princes of a city. I will never forego my examples of my Romans. If their ways of living should be examined, and the institutions of their republic, there will be observed in her many things not impossible to introduce in a society where there yet might be something of good." Cosimo said, "What are those things similar to the ancients that you would introduce?" Fabrizio said, "To honour and reward virtue, not to have contempt for poverty, to esteem the modes and orders of military discipline, to constrain citizens to love one another, to live without factions, to esteem less the private than the public good, and other such things which could easily be added in these times. It is not difficult to persuade people to these ways, when one considers these at length and approaches them in the usual manner, for the truth will appear in such examinations that every common talent is capable of undertaking them. Anyone can arrange these things. For example, one plants trees under the shadow of which he lives more happily and merrily than if he had not planted them." Cosimo said, "I do not want to reply to anything of what you have spoken, but I do want leave to give judgment on these, which can easily be judged. And I shall address myself to you who accuse those who in serious and important actions are not imitators of the ancients, thinking that in this way I can more easily carry out my intentions. I should want, therefore, to know from you whence it arises that, on the one hand, you condemn those who do not imitate the ancients in their actions; on the other hand, in matters of war, which is your profession, and which you are judged to be excellent, it is not observed that you have employed any of the ancient methods, or those which have some similarity." Fabrizio said, "You have come to the point where I expected you to, for what I said did not merit any other question, nor did I wish for any other. And although I am able to save myself with a simple excuse, none the less I want, for your greater satisfaction and mine, since the season weather allows it, to enter into a much longer discussion. Men who want to do something ought first to prepare themselves with all industry, in order, when the opportunity is seen, to be prepared to achieve that which they have proposed. And whenever the preparations are undertaken cautiously, unknown to anyone, no one can be accused of negligence unless he is first discovered by the occasion, in which, if it is not then successful, it is seen that either he has not sufficiently prepared himself, or that he has not in some part given thought to it. And as the opportunity has not come to me to be able to show the preparations I would make to bring the military to your ancient organization, and if I have not done so, I cannot be blamed either by you or by others, I believe this excuse is enough to respond to your accusation." Cosimo said, "It would be enough if I was certain that the opportunity did not present itself." Fabrizio said, "But because I know you could doubt whether this opportunity has come about or not, I want to discuss at length, if you will listen to me with patience, which preparations are necessary to be made first, what occasion needs to arise, what difficulty impedes the preparations from becoming beneficial and the occasion from arriving, and that this is, which appears a paradox, most difficult and most easy to do." Cosimo said, "You cannot do anything more pleasing for me and for the others than this. But if it is not painful for you to speak, it will never be painful for us to listen. But as this discussion may be long, I want help from these, my friends, and with your permission and I pray you one thing, that you do not become annoyed if we sometimes interrupt you with some opportune question." Fabrizio said, "I am most content that you, Cosimo, with these other young people here, should question me, for I believe that young men will become more familiar with military matters, and will more easily understand what I have to say. The others, whose hair is white and whose blood is icy, in part are enemies of war, and in part incorrigible, as those who believe that the times and not the evil ways constrain men to live in such a fashion. So ask anything of me, with assurance and without regard. I desire this as much because it will afford me a little rest, as because it will give me pleasure not to leave any doubt in your minds. I want to begin from your words where you said to me that in war, which is my profession, I have not employed any of the ancient methods. Upon this I say that, this being a profession by which men of every time were not able to live honestly, it cannot be employed as a profession except by a republic or a kingdom. And both of these, if well established, will never allow any of their citizens or subjects to employ it as a profession. For he who practices it will never be judged to be good, as to gain some usefulness from it at any time he must be rapacious, deceitful, violent, and have many qualities which of necessity do not make him good. Nor can any men who employ this as a profession, the great as well as the least, be made otherwise, for this profession does not provide for them in peace, whence they are obliged either to hope that there will be no peace, or to gain so much for themselves in times of war that they can provide for themselves in times of peace. And wherever one of these two thoughts exists, it does not occur in a good man. For from the desire to provide for oneself in every circumstance, robberies, violence, and assassinations result, which such soldiers do to friends as well as to enemies. And from not desiring peace, there arises those deceptions which captains perpetrate upon those whom they lead, because war hardens them. And even if peace occurs frequently, it happens that the leaders, being deprived of their stipends and of their licentious mode of living, raise a flag of piracy, and without any mercy sack a province. Do you not have within the memory of events of your time many soldiers in Italy, finding themselves without employment because of the termination of wars, gathered themselves into very troublesome gangs, calling themselves companies, and went about levying tribute on the towns and sacking the country without there being any remedy able to be applied? Have you not read how the Carthaginian soldiers, when the first war they engaged in with the Romans under Mattus and Spendius was ended, tumultuously chose two leaders and waged a more dangerous war against the Carthaginians than that which they had just concluded with the Romans? And in the time of our fathers, Sforza, in order to be able to live comfortably in times of peace, not only deceived the Milanese, in whose pay he was, but took away their liberty and became their prince. All the other soldiers of Italy who have employed the military as their particular profession have been like this man, and if, through their malignity, they have not become Dukes of Milan, so much more do they merit to be censured, for without such a return, if their lives were to be examined, they all have the same cares. Sforza, father of Francesco, constrained Queen Giovanna to throw herself into the arms of the King of Aragon, having abandoned her suddenly, and left her disarmed amid her enemies, only in order to satisfy his ambition of either levying tribute or taking the kingdom. Braccio, with the same industry, sought to occupy the kingdom of Naples, and would have succeeded had he not been routed and killed at Aquila. Such evils do not result from anything else other than the existence of men who employ the practice of soldiering as their own profession. Do you not have a proverb which strengthens my argument, which says, "War makes robbers, and peace hangs them"? For those who do not know how to live by another practice, and not finding any one who will support them in that, and not having so much virtue that they know how to come and live together honourably, are forced by necessity to roam the streets, and justice is forced to extinguish them. Cosimo said, "You have made me turn this profession and art of soldiering back almost to nothing, and I had supposed it to be the most excellent and most honourable of any. So that if you do not clarify this better, I will not be satisfied. For if it is as you say, I do not know whence arises the glory of Caesar, Pompey, Scipio, Marcellus, and so many Roman captains who are celebrated for their fame as the gods." Fabrizio said, "I have not yet finished discussing all that I proposed, which included two things. The one, that a good man was not able to undertake this practice because of his profession. The other, that a well-established republic or kingdom would never permit its subjects or citizens to employ it for their profession. Concerning the first, I have spoken as much as occurred to me. It remains for me to talk of the second, where I shall reply to this last question of yours. And I say that Pompey and Caesar, and almost all those captains who were in Rome after the last Carthaginian war, acquired fame as valiant men, not as good men. But those who had lived before them acquired glory as valiant and good men, which results from the fact that these latter did not take up the practice of war as their profession, and those whom I named first as those who employed it as their profession. And while the Republic lived immaculately, no great citizen ever presumed by means of such a practice to enrich himself during periods of peace, by breaking laws, despoiling the provinces, usurping and tyrannizing the country, and imposing himself in every way. Nor did any one of the lowest fortune think of violating the sacred agreement, adhere himself to any private individual, not fearing the Senate, or to perform any disgraceful act of tyranny in order to live at all times by the profession of war. But those who were captains, being content with the triumph, returned with a desire for the private life, and those who were members of the army returned with a desire to lay down the arms they had taken up, and every one returned to the art, trade, or profession by which they ordinarily lived. Nor was there ever any one who hoped to provide for himself by plunder and by means of these arts. A clear and evident example of this, as it applies to great citizens, can be found in the regent Attilio, who, when he was captain of the Roman armies in Africa, and having almost defeated the Carthaginians, asked the Senate for permission to return to his house and look after his farms, which were being spoiled by his labourers. Whence it is clearer than the sun that if that man had practised war as his profession, and by means of it thought to obtain some advantage for himself, having so many provinces which he could plunder, he would not have asked permission to return to take care of his fields, as each day he could have obtained more than the value of all his possessions. But as these good men, who do not practise war as their profession, do not expect to gain anything from it except hard work, danger, and glory, as soon as they are sufficiently glorious, desire to return to their homes and live from the practice of their own profession. As to men of lower status and gregarious soldiers, it is also true that every one voluntarily withdrew from such a practice. For when he was not fighting, he would have desired to fight, but when he was fighting, wanted to be dismissed. Which illustrates the many ways, and especially in seeing that it was among the first privileges, that the Roman people gave to one of its citizens, that he should not be constrained unwillingly to fight. Rome, therefore, when she was well organized, which it was up to the time of the Gracchi, did not have one soldier who had to take up this practice as a profession, and therefore had few bad ones, and these were severely punished. A well-ordered city, therefore, ought to desire that this training for war ought to be employed in times of peace as an exercise, and in times of war as a necessity and for glory, and allow the public only to use it as a profession as Rome did. And any citizen who has other aims in using such exercises is not good, and any city which governs itself otherwise is not well ordered. Cosimo said, "I am very much content and satisfied with what you have said up to now, and this conclusion which you have made pleases me greatly, and I believe it will be true when expected from a republic. But as to kings, I do not yet know why I should believe that a king would not want particularly to have around him those who take up such a practice as their profession." Fabrizio said, "A well-ordered kingdom ought so much the more to avoid such artificers, for these only are the things which corrupt the king and all the ministers in a tyranny. And do not on the other side tell me of some present kingdoms, for I will not admit them to be all well-ordered kingdoms. For kingdoms that are well-ordered do not give absolute power to rule to their kings, except in the armies, for only there is a quick decision necessary, and therefore he who rules must have this unique power. In other matters he cannot do anything without counsel, and those who counsel him have to fear those whom he may have near him, who in times of peace desire war because they are unable to live without it. But I want to dwell a little longer on this subject, and look for a kingdom totally good, but similar to those that exist today, where those who take up the profession of war for themselves still ought to be feared by the kings. For the sinews of armies, without any doubt, are the infantry, so that if a king does not organize himself in such a way that his infantry, in times of peace, are content to return to their homes and live from the practices of their own professions, it must happen of necessity that he will be ruined, for there is not to be found a more dangerous infantry than one which is composed of those who make the waging of war as their profession. For you are forced to make war always, or pay them always, or to risk the danger that they will take the kingdom from you. To make war always is not possible, and one cannot pay always, and hence that danger is run of losing the state. My Romans, as I have said, as long as they were wise and good, never permitted that their citizens should take up this practice as their profession, notwithstanding that they were able to raise them at all times, for they made war at all times. But in order to avoid the harm which this continuous practice of theirs could do to them, since the times did not change, they changed the men, and kept turning men over in their legions, so that every 15 years they always completely remanned them. And thus they desired men in the flower of their age, which is from 18 to 35 years, during which time their legs, their hands, and their eyes worked together, nor did they expect that their strength should decrease in them, or that malice should grow in them, as they did in corrupt times. Otavinus first, and then Tiberius, thinking more of their own power than the public usefulness, in order to rule over the Roman people more easily, began to disarm them, and to keep the same armies continually at the frontiers of the empire. And because they did not think it sufficient to hold the Roman people and the Senate in check, they instituted an army called the Praetorian Guard, which they kept near the walls of Rome in a fort adjacent to that city. And as they now began freely to permit men assigned to the army to practice military matters as their profession, there soon resulted that these men became insolent, and they became formidable to the Senate and damaging to the Emperor. Whence there resulted that many men were killed because of their insolence, for they gave the empire and took it away from anyone they wished. And it often occurred that at one time there were many emperors created by the several armies. From which state of affairs proceeded first the division of the empire, and finally its ruin. Kings ought, therefore, if they want to live securely, have their infantry composed of men who, when it is necessary for him to wage war, will willingly go forth to it for love of him, and afterwards, when peace comes, more willingly return to their homes, which will always happen if he selects men who know how to live by a profession other than this. And thus he ought to desire, with the coming of peace, that his princes return to governing their people, gentlemen to the cultivation of their possessions, and the infantry to their particular arts, trades, or professions. And every one of these will willingly make war in order to have peace, and will not seek to disturb the peace to have war. Cosimo said, "Truly this reasoning of yours appears to me well considered. None the less, as it is almost contrary to what I have thought up to now, my mind is not yet purged of every doubt. For I see many lords and gentlemen who provide for themselves in times of peace through the training for war, as do your equals who obtain provisions from princes and the community. I also see almost all the men-at-arms remaining in the garrisons of the city and of the fortresses, so that it appears to me that there is a long time of peace for everyone." Fabrizio said, "I do not believe that you believe this, that everyone has a place in times of peace, for other reasons can be cited for their being stationed there, and the small number of people who remain in the places mentioned by you will answer your question. What is the proportion of infantry needed to be employed in time of war to that in peace? For while the fortresses and the city are garrisoned in times of peace, they are much more garrisoned in times of war. To this should be added the soldiers kept in the field, who are great in number, but all of whom are released in times of peace. And concerning the garrisons of states, who are small in number, Pope Julius and you have shown how much they are to be feared who do not know any other profession than war, as you have taken them out of your garrisons because of their insolence, and placed the Swiss there, who are born and raised under the laws, and are chosen by the community in an honest election. So do not say further that in times of peace there is a place for every man. As to the men-at-arms continued in their enlistment in peace-time, the answer appears more difficult. None the less, whoever considers everything well will easily find the answer, for this thing of keeping on the men-at-arms is a corrupt thing, and not good. The reason is this: As there are men who do not have any art, trade, or profession, 1,000 evils will arise every day in those states where they exist, and especially so if they are able to be joined by a great number of companions. But as they are few, and unable by themselves to constitute an army, they therefore cannot do any serious damage. None the less, they have done so many times, as I said of Francesco and of Sforza, his father, and of Braccio of Perugia. So I do not approve of this custom of keeping men-at-arms, both because it is corrupt, and because it can cause great evils. Cosimo said, "What would you do without them? Or if you keep them, how do you do so?" Fabrizio said, "By means of an ordinance, not like those of the King of France, because they are as dangerous and insolent as ours, but like those of the ancients, who created cavalry from their subjects, and in times of peace sent them back to their homes to live by the practice of their own profession, as I shall discuss at length before I finish this discussion. So, if this part of the army can now live by such a practice, even when there is peace, it stems from a corrupt order. As to the provisions that are reserved for me and the other leaders, I say to you that this, likewise, is a most corrupt order, for a wise republic ought not to give them to anyone. Rather, it ought to employ its citizens as leaders in war, and in times of peace desire that they return to their professions. Thus, also, a wise king ought not to give provisions to them, or if he does give them, the reasons ought to be either as a reward for some excellent act, or in order to avail himself of such a man in peace as well as in war. And because you have mentioned me, I want the example to include me, and I say I have never practised war as a profession, for my profession is to govern my subjects and defend them, and in order to defend them I must love peace, but know how to make war. And my king does not reward and esteem me so much for what I know of war, as because I know also how to counsel him in peace. Any king ought not, therefore, to want to have next to him any one who is not thusly constituted, if he is wise and wants to govern prudently. For if he has around him either too many lovers of peace or too many lovers of war, they will cause him to err. I cannot, in this first discussion of mine, and according to my suggestion, say otherwise, and if this is not enough for you, you must seek one who satisfies you better. You can begin to recognize how much difficulty there is in bringing the ancient methods into modern ways, and what preparations a wise man must make, and what opportunities he can hope for to put them into execution. But little by little you will know these things better, if the discussion on bringing any part of the ancient institutions to the present order of things does not weary you. End of Book 1, Part 1.
Start listening now. Sign up for your 3-book, 30-day free trial from AudioBooks.com. Click the link in the video description and get your 3 audiobooks free today. There's no strings attached, and you can cancel anytime. Click the link in the video description and sign up now.